We're really excited to have all of you here, especially those of you who came to our first IRB webinar. If you did come to that one, you know that one of the things I said there is that knowing about IRB can really help you when you're in the planning stage of your proposal and when you're trying to figure out what your evaluation is going to look like. And so WestEd, we're really happy to have them here to give you an advanced webinar to see some of the intersections between IRB and FERPA and institutional research and your research design. And also for those of you who are already in the middle of learning lab grants and are running into problems, we hope that this is going to be useful for you all as well. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our colleagues from WestEd.
Thank you very much, Selena. And yes, welcome everybody. We're very happy to have you here today for our second Learning Lab webinar in the two-part series. This one is IRB, Institutional Research and Research Design. Today's session is going to provide a quick contextual overview which defines and explains what constitutes research. And then we're going to dig deeper into the regulatory requirements and ethical principles that you will be keeping in mind when designing studies involving human subjects, everywhere from intent to assessing and minimizing risk in IRB reviews, data collection, and protections. We'll also have time to go over a case scenario. So with that, I think we have time to kick it off with at least us introducing ourselves. So again, welcome. As we're talking, please introduce yourselves also in the chat. We always love to know who's in this session with us. I'm Lisa Lefevre. I am a senior program associate with WestEd.
Great. Hi, Lisa. You were cutting out just a little bit there on my end. I'm Beth. I'm also a senior research associate at WestEd and work on a variety of research and program evaluations where I work really closely with all kinds of student data, data that we analyze from student records or administrative data, as well as data that we collect through interviews, focus groups, and surveys.
Great. And as Beth mentioned, we're here from WestEd. WestEd is helping the Learning Lab with evaluation support services. We are also providing technical assistance. So moving forward here, we're going to cover a little bit today on this section. It's a little bit of a review about research evaluation and IRB. Next slide. So the first webinar covered the federal regulations defining research and what it is, which is a systematic investigation, including research, development, testing, evaluation, all of which is designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. As a reminder, Learning Lab grants are more or less aiming to support projects that constitute research. So keep that in mind as you're designing for them. Some grantees and funded projects are also including more evaluation processes and some even outside evaluators alongside their work. So we're throwing in a definition or two for that. There are multiple definitions. All of them kind of define that there is a systematic element to them in evaluation. So keep that in mind because systematic in nature also factors in to when IRB is considering work with human subjects. So moving on to the next slide, what is an IRB? This is quick review. It is an institutional review board that serves as an oversight committee. It is typically housed at an institution and it reviews proposed research studies and designs to foremost protect the rights and welfare of human subjects. So those are the people involved in a study. It also serves as a regulatory compliance oversight committee. It ensures research ethics and integrity. When do you need an IRB review? In both research and evaluation. Sometimes people wonder about evaluation. An IRB review is needed when a study involves human subjects and is designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. What do these things mean? Involving human subjects means research and evaluation that involves a living person, that includes information, biospecimens, many of you are not doing that here, but still information, obtained through an intervention or an interaction. It also means obtaining and studying, usually with identifiable private information. What falls then into that category, generalizable knowledge, This means that the resulting learning from your study is expected to contribute to an established body of knowledge, or to apply beyond the population studied, and or to apply to other settings. So those are kind of the foundational things you keep in mind when deciding or trying to think about, is my research needing an IRB review? Mm-hmm. We talked also about IRBs ensuring rights for human subjects, taking a look at ethics. What are the ethics that drive the review? There are 3 key principles. They're found in the Belmont report. This was covered in webinar 1. And these principles are respect for persons. So here you're protecting an individual's autonomy and their privacy, making sure that there is informed consent processes involved with your study, and that you're establishing understanding for voluntary participation in research. Then there's beneficence, so an obligation to protect an individual. This is very important. Protect individuals from harm by designing research to minimize participation, minimize the risk, and maximize benefits. So then ultimately, you're looking also at justice, which emphasizes fair and equitable selection of research participants, and also keeping in mind special care that needs to be considered for populations whose status falls within a vulnerable group. Now, all of that was a bit of a review for those of you who were on the first webinar, but let's dig deeper now into risk and the types of IRB review. Risk is particularly important when you're taking a look at minimizing it and when you're looking at that principle of beneficence. Mm-hmm. So in research involving human subjects, there are 3 categories of risk, all of which are really anchored around the middle category. So kind of minimal risk and the levels that are above it and beyond it. So the common rule sets a definition with criteria for minimal risk. We have that definition here. It means that the probability and magnitude of harm or discomfort anticipated in the research are not greater in and of themselves than those ordinarily encountered in daily life or during the performance of routine physical or psychological examinations or tests. So research that falls under this level, that includes studies that have less than minimal risk, and vice versa. Those that are greater are at the top level and have most sensitive level of considerations involved. So to give you a few examples of risks that you want to minimize and protect people from, it is a broad and far-ranging list. It ranges from physical harm, so pain, exposure to illness, emotional harm, or mental harm, so anguish, embarrassment, keep in mind embarrassment, anxiety, and of course, some of those social or financial considerations, so loss of reputation. You want to be considerate of any financial awards that might be lost, social capital, and beyond. So those are some of the categories of risk. Very important to keep in mind because those categories of risks factor into your categories of review for IRB. That minimal risk standard really aligns those categories and are what the IRB kind of takes a look at when they're looking at your protocol to see if you fall within the level that you proposed. You have 3 levels. There's exempt review, which presents no greater than minimal risk and fits into exempt categories. We're going to cover some of those in a minute. This usually involves one member reviewing the protocol or your design, and occasionally a limited IRB review. Then there is the next level up, and that's expedited review. This also occurs for research that presents no greater than minimal risk, but the criteria fall into minimal risk. So this review will involve more IRB members. It might not be, maybe it's 2 or 3, usually around then. And then when you take a look at the expedited one, more than half of the criteria for that covers sort of clinical research and procedures or biological specimens, which are non-invasive. Many of you will not be falling into that, of course, but there are some other categories that might be significant here. So there's categories that cover research involving materials and data that was collected for non-research purposes. That could also be an exempt category. There's research needing continuing review or collection of recorded data made for research purposes. And then here's one that might be interesting to many of you. We see these in grants often, which is research on individual or group characteristics or behaviors. So this is including, not limited to, research on perception, motivation, identity, communication, beliefs, and practices. And also when you're looking at using surveys, interviews, oral history, focus groups, and the like. Keep in mind that while I'm mentioning these under expedited, they could also fall under exempt. So your best source to help you with determinations are the source that determines, it's that IRB. And finally, at the very highest level, that's where you're going to have risks, is your full board review. That full board review includes all the IRB members coming together to meet. So those are the 3 levels, right? Digging into the exempt review, right? Exempt review occurs for research design that gets reviewed and determined, again, to be no greater than minimal risk to subjects. It is not an exemption from human subject protections. That means you may still have to go and do a protocol. You may need to submit it for review for a determination to your IRB office. It also means, and this is something people need to kind of understand, that the research design study must meet the requirements for an exempt determination in full, so not in part. So if any part of your protocol might not be falling within an exempt, your IRB will probably come back to you and say, hey, let's talk about it. This is where it'll fall. And then you would take it from there. So again, it's your IRB who are really primed to understand where the determination falls. Now, why are we covering exempt categories the most? We also mentioned the expedited. It's that educational practices will tend to fall within either exempt categories or expedited more so than others. That doesn't preclude that they might be a full review, but they usually are within these 2. So research conducted in an established or commonly accepted educational setting, so K-12, college classrooms, after-school programs, and even alternative education programs that involve normal educational practices. So established teaching methods, curriculum content, and the such fall within this category. So too do educational tests like cognitive, diagnostic, aptitude achievement, and survey procedures, interviews, observations of public behavior. If what is collected, if the information collected is not identifiable, and if disclosure doesn't reasonably place a subject at risk. So risk here could be criminal or civil liability or any sort of damage. And that harkens back to that reputation, the financial standing, etc. So there are 3 more categories, or 4, that cover exempt categories. This is that you have studies with benign behavioral interventions. So again, when you're thinking about that, you're thinking about adult subjects, not minors, and it's their inclusion with consent. Then other than that, there's secondary research for which consent is not required. This is research that uses identifiable private information if it is publicly available, and the investigator records information in a way that cannot identify subjects, or the research is conducted for the federal government using government information that had been obtained for non-research purpose. And then these 2 others here are whether or not it's federal public benefit programs here, that the research is for that, such as demonstration projects, or I don't think anybody here is doing that, but taste and food quality, that falls under exempt too. So, those Coke testing ones, I don't know where they fall, but chances are it's a taste test. Again, I can't stress this enough. The question of who determines, right? Your IRB is there as a critical friend. They are not like this oversight police department that you can't approach. They are there to seek guidance from. They will help determine kind of your direction that you might want to take for your research. They will know your policies involved, and they are great supports that are available to you. You have other critical friends at your disposition too. There's your Institutional Research Office, for example, and your Data Security Protection Office. They are trained and knowledgeable resources. In fact, we have one of our Data Security and Protection Office team on the call today, Sean Cottrell. He's joining us and he helped with this. We are not all knowledgeable, so we are grateful to be able to reach out. And of course, there are some tips. Many of you are in the early processes of designing. So you want to really engage early with your IRB in planning your research. You want to ask them, especially with cooperative research and collaboration, what considerations might you have involving multiple institutions and multiple IRBs. Sometimes it's not just one. So they can help you understand requirements that are needed, and then understanding what your partners might need. And that will be navigating multiple IRB processes and reviews even, and perhaps data sharing agreements and MOUs. And then there are some key questions you can keep in mind to help you with this process. Some of these, which I still use today, is first and foremost, does my project require IRB or an exemption review and approval? I often reach out to find out, and they'll ask if they can read or understand what I'm doing. My IRB will tell me, okay, you need this, this, or this right now. If it does need a review, does it meet the exempt criteria? If so, am I going to have to figure out how much time is included in this review? Often, yes. The exempt categories take shorter time, expedite a little bit more. Full, boy, that takes a lot because you're having to bring everybody together. So factor in your time. Also, what are the processes for approval, right? It's going to be different for a community college versus the university and some other entity. In fact, sometimes an institution might not have an IRB, so they have to use an outside IRB, which then adds another consideration, right? What are the costs, if any, to my project or my department for this review? Do you have to factor in into your budget that review? And then finally, what other internal approvals might be needed or permissions that I need to receive for this project? So these are some key questions to keep in mind. Don't worry, these slides will be made available to you. You can have this little handy slide to say, check, check, check. Did I ask these questions of myself? These aren't the only questions. There's also data questions to keep in mind. So I'm going to pause and turn it over to Beth.
Great, thank you, Lisa. And Lisa, our colleague Sean, and also our Learning Lab partners are all standing by to answer your questions if they arise. So feel free to use the chat if, as we're explaining something, you have a question that might be related to your specific project. So for our plan today, I'm going to talk a bit about the different types of data that you might collect as part of your Learning Lab grant and how you might collect that data and kind of the implications for data security and institutional review board protocols. And then we'll walk through an example and we'll have a period for question and response. So I wanted to talk a bit about the types of data that you all might be handling as part of your Learning Lab project. And we work directly with grantees, so we see that many grantees are accessing student records data. They want to interview students, conduct focus groups, and conduct surveys with students. And in those data collection processes, you're collecting typically personally identifiable information. And that's really an umbrella term for any kind of information about individuals that when used alone or together with other characteristics can be used to identify people and used for identity theft. So we want to talk a bit about what this kind of protected data is and some of the responsibilities that you will have if you're handling this type of data. So when does data become personally identifiable? When you have direct information, first of all, so that can be like names, addresses, phone numbers, email addresses, student ID numbers, but it can also become identifiable when you have a lot of characteristics about individuals like their race, disability status, which are protected classes, as well as their gender, perhaps financial aid eligibility. So these are common data elements that I know I collect when I'm conducting research about students, to see if a program is being conducted equitably. So we want to make sure when we're collecting that kind of information, even if we don't know students' names, even if we don't have their ID numbers, that's actually still personally identifiable information. And I want to make a distinguish between two types of data. So one I mentioned is direct identifiers, and that's data that relates specifically to an individual. So I gave the example of someone's address, someone's social security number, someone's student ID number. But we can also collect information that indirectly can identify people when used in combination with other information. So that might be where they're located, like their zip code or their birth date, or something about their educational record, like a course that they were enrolled in, for example. So even when individual level data that you might get from your institutional research office has like a scrambled student ID we'll sometimes use to de-identify, it still contains personally identifiable information. So I just want to flag this for you, and Lisa's adding some links in the chat for me about FERPA, and it's helpful to understand that part of the reason that we're interested in attending to data security issues around students' information is this Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. So we're talking about how the codes and the laws that protect personally identifiable information in students' records. And for the definition of FERPA, we're talking about education records as including those that are directly related to a student and are maintained by a college, in this case, an educational agency or institution. And in the type of work that we conduct and that you'll probably be conducting as part of your Learning Lab grant, there are certain exceptions for when universities are allowed to share or disclose personally identifiable information without the direct consent of students. So this is really related to student records, your university or college's administrative data, and that they can share student level information with you without the written consent of the student or their parent. And there's a list of different exceptions for when this kind of information can be disclosed without consent. So when you're working with PII, there's some things that you want to keep in mind, your ethical responsibilities to protect against the release of this personally identifiable information. So I just wanted to share a couple ways that we often do this in our work, and that you would typically there will be fields where you like spell this out in your IRB protocol. So you could use this kind of as a template for the topics that you want to make sure you touch on when you're completing an IRB protocol. So the first one is minimizing the data you collect. And so if you're not going to be using gender in your study to understand if there's gender parity in whatever program or like pedagogical intervention that you're introducing, then you wouldn't want to request that data. So minimizing the data that you collect, ensuring your data's confidentiality. So this can look like having procedures in place, like using a secure cloud-based folder, limiting the number of individuals that have access to this protected information, monitoring for risk. So if you're using data analysis software, like I work in Stata, so when I use Stata, I want to make sure I'm monitoring for data breaches, or perhaps you're using Qualtrics to conduct a survey, or you're working in Box. You want to monitor all these other softwares that you're using to maintain the confidential student records that you have. I mentioned limiting access and restricting use. So thinking about, does every single person on your team need to access this data? And what level of access do they need? I mentioned a bit about secure data storage. And then you always want to specify how long you plan to hold this information with both direct, again, that's like the name and student ID number, and indirect identifiers. So that's like race, gender, maybe their zip code and things like that. So thinking about how long you need to hold that data to conduct your analysis. Now we're throwing a lot at you here. I see there's activity in the chat, and thank you so much, Sean, for being here. Anybody else from my team want to jump in before we move on to the next section?
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up the question in case people haven't seen it. And the question is really about surveys, right? And whether or not, with a survey, if you're not collecting identifiable information, whether you need an IRB review. And, what we're bringing up are some of the considerations. First and foremost, what are you doing? What is your intent with it, right? And then you'll see Sean has many different things for surveys. Is it intended to produce generalizable knowledge or be used in a new study, right, that produces generalizable knowledge? Then that IRB review may be required. Does that survey, does it include minors? IRB review may need to be required. If the survey involves interpersonal interactions, right? Interactions is part of it. In the other webinar, we talked about that. Is there an intervention? It may be required. So the phrase, it may be required, means really that it usually can be, and it would mean needing to see whether or not that's exempt or best case scenario is you talk to your IRB and see what they say, and they can help and guide you along. But there are considerations here.
Yeah, Dr. Lynn, this is a great question. And oftentimes you might not do a survey where you ask the person, what is your name? But in order to distribute the survey to students, you need to know students' names and students' email addresses. So that's normally where this information can be connected to the records that you're collecting in the survey. So there's kind of two ways. We'll talk about this in a couple slides, but you can submit a link where it's anonymous. So you have one link. Drawbacks with that, you never know. I could complete your survey 5 times, you would never know. Also, sometimes these surveys like Qualtrics I mentioned have embedded fields like your IP address or your location. So they're collecting this information that could be personally identifiable. Even if you're not asking for gender or race, there are these other measures that are embedded in the survey software that are PII. So I would say that I have always used IRB, completed an IRB protocol for when I do surveys with students. And I typically do individualized links. So I have to know the student's name and email address in order to send them the survey. Please follow up, though. I think this is a great question. It really add a lot of texture to the conversation. So I just want to talk through quickly 3 types of data that you are commonly going to be probably collecting as part of your learning lab work. And I know that we're all researchers here in this room, but rather than being STEM researchers, Lisa and I work with this kind of information from students as our data on a regular basis. So talking about administrative data, I've mentioned that a couple times. What I mean by that is analyzing student level institutional records. So that's maybe data from students' application to your college or university, course data, such as their course performance. I have a couple of examples here of different data that you might be collecting as part of your learning lab project. Things that you might want to consider when you're working with student records or administrative data, that you would want to spell out your procedures for doing this in your IRB, and that's the receipt and transmission of data. So how are you going to get these files? Who's going to generate them? Who's going to have access to them? These are all things that we want to be mindful of because of the data security issues that I mentioned. And then once you have the information and you're working with it and you're reporting it, a couple things to consider are ways that we can continue to ensure confidentiality and security. One is minimum cell sizes and suppression. So oftentimes we'll have procedure in place where I'll say in my IRB that if a cell size is less than 10, then I will mask that. And the reason for this is sometimes with those indirect identifiers, for example, if you're looking you have a lot of different cross tabulations. You're looking at gender, in race, in a specific course for students who maybe got a C or worse. Then it can become very easy to identify individuals. So these are some common practices that we use to ensure data protection when it comes to administrative data. So thinking about surveys, just a couple things that you'll want to be sure to attend to if you're proposing a survey and you plan to talk about this in your IRB protocol. I mentioned a couple different data collection applications. Usually IRBs want to know what other software programs are you going to be using because there's implications for data security when you're using any new program you use like introduces a risk, right? Because of data breaches. You'll want to explain how you plan to identify your student sample. Lisa talked about how one of the important principles of IRB is making sure that there's broad inclusion. And so you'll always want to say potentially who could be included and who would be excluded. Some typical inclusion or exclusion criteria might be related to age, gender, geographic location, race, ethnicity, subject matter. So you want to say, like, if you're going to do a survey just with students in a computer science course, that's part of your sampling framework. That's part of who gets included and who gets excluded from your study. It's just students in that course, potentially in a particular term. So those are things that you'll want to make sure to spell out in your IRB, your processes around these things. Finally, there's recruitment. So your data security office at your university or college, or if you go to an external body for your IRB, is going to want to know how do you plan to contact people for this? So saying whether it's through email, whether you're using a course website. I talked about whether you'd use a link that's accessible to everyone. Are you going to send a personalized invitation to people? And finally, informed consent. So typically with the first interaction that you have with your potential participant, you'll want to be educating them about their consent to participate. So there's ways to embed a consent question as the first question of your survey, which is something that I often do. You know, if you agree to participate in this research study, please select the appropriate option below. Selecting the agree button indicates, you know, that you want to participate. So that's one way that you can build that in kind of a seamless way. And I just want to flag that a draft of all of this information is usually required for your IRB protocol. So that's why we're talking about this, because a draft of your survey, a draft of your recruitment message, you know, a draft of your consent documents is all going to be required when you submit IRB. So it takes time to develop these things. So you'll want to build that in. Okay, yeah, and this I really just wanted to share for you all as kind of a template for what I typically include in consent for a survey. So you'll want to specify for your potential participants, why is the survey being done? Why am I being selected to participate? How long is this going to take? What's happening to my data? If I don't do this survey, is it going to affect my grade in your class? Is it going to affect my eligibility for financial aid? So these are the kind of things that you want to spell out for participants, and also your IRB office will be wanting to see that you've thought through these things. So finally, the last type of data that you might be collecting is, you know, direct conversations with students through focus groups or interviews. And a lot of the same tips that we have related to surveys also apply here. So thinking about recruitment, in order to arrange to have a focus group or interview with someone, you'll probably need to know their name and their email address and possibly their phone number. So by definition, you're collecting direct identifiers and personally identifiable information. You can minimize the PII that you collect. That's just a general principle that we want to infuse through all of our work. And then informed consent. So same thing that I mentioned on the previous slide, you'll want to let them know why they're being invited to participate, how long it's going to take. With focus groups, you want to always say that there's a different risk when you do a focus group. It's a greater risk for embarrassment. And also because other people are listening in on the conversation, other students in this case. And there's also a greater risk for data security because there's no and confidentiality, because I could disclose something in a focus group and then someone else in that focus group could go out and share that information. So you always want to let your potential participant, in this case a student, know that anything that's shared in the focus group, we want to just keep within the focus group space and not share. typically all of us these days are doing some combination of Zoom and in-person interviews. And so if you are doing Zoom interviews, you'll want to let them know that the session will be video recorded and make sure you have their consent to that. And then with a focus group or interview, you're collecting data that's audio as well as sometimes video. And then sometimes you have a transcript of the information. So you'll just want to make sure that in your IRB, you let them know that you're aware of all the different types of data that you're collecting. So it's not just that conversation that you're having, but it's these artifacts from the conversation that you'll want to make sure you're treating securely. And with that, I'm going to pause. I know we've thrown a lot at you. And we're joined by Sean from our data security office, and Lisa and I are also available to weigh in on questions. So has anything else come up for folks as we've been sharing?
Beth, I don't see any questions on the chat, but I'd love people to feel free to come off of mute and ask any questions that they might have, any clarification. Feel free to just ask.
Hi. Oh, am I off mute? Okay.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Lorna Gonzalez from Cal State Channel Islands. And I'm sorry if you addressed this, but a question that I have is where to submit IRB approval for. So we have IRB at our campus. Our grant is a collaboration across several campuses, each of which have their own IRB units and, review boards. And then participants are going to be faculty and staff working presumably at educational institutions, mostly universities and community colleges, and where the participants might have IRB review boards. So my question is where, and sorry if you addressed this already, but where are all the places that we need to make sure that we're covered to be approved to do research?
Beth, do you want me to start off? Well, so one thing that comes to mind here is this is a collaborative, right? So it's a cooperative situation here. Who is the lead institution, if any, on the study? Because sometimes you can have different cases where you have a lead institution, an IRB doing it, if the other support it, but times you might have to individual IRBs for who lead. And then second question is also, it's more of a comment. Everybody should know what their institution IRB is at their institution or campus. So oftentimes they'll have a website. You can go and contact them, but they should all be there. And if I recall, the Learning Lab created a nifty document at one point. I don't know if it'll be shared, but it was for webinar 1 that had contacts of different IRBs at different campuses and institutions. So those are sort of two considerations. So in your case, is there a lead? Like, who's the PI?
Yes, we have an institution. First of all, we all know our own respective IRB, where to find them. But we do have a lead, but then we have co-PIs. So, but we're at different institutions. So my question is whether we're submitting it through the lead institution or through all institutions.
It would really depend on your institution's policies. So to start with asking your institutions what they do at their institution and see. It could be that they will go for a agreement where you have one. I think we called it, what did we call them? The last one. It was like a blanket agreement. It could be that they need other reviews. I know in the cases of some institutions, there's a local IRB review, even if there was an IRB review already. So again, it's knowing what the policies are and if everybody will go for one or if individuals are needed.
Yeah, and Lorna, I would add the way the way that I typically see this play out is just like how Lisa called out, is that you'll just go through like the lead university, go through that IRB. And then you would display like proof that you've already successfully gone through the IRB once, and you generally don't have to go through it. And there's probably I've seen this play out different, like in just in my past. And so allow yourself some time to sort of allow for that negotiation across those participating groups. If you have like 5 different agencies playing together and all 5 of those have an IRB, you might want to say, hey, like heads up, all 5 agencies, we're going to be doing this work. Are we good with going with this group?
Mm-hmm.
And like really giving so I mean, like you don't want any of that stuff to surprise you like later on down the line.
Yeah, that's exactly what I would recommend. And don't be afraid to get on an email with all the staff from each of the respective IRBs and find out, hey, WestEd is going to do an IRB review. Are you willing to have a reliance agreement where you kind of defer to WestEd's IRB review in the process? So that's something that can happen when you're partnering with multiple institutions. There will be kind of a lead, and then others will defer to the leads review. And so what you're describing, Lauren, I just want to point out is researchers at different institutions that would have access to the data, and then participants that might also be from a range of institutions. So yeah, it's important to get everybody involved in the conversation.
Awesome. And thank you for asking that question, Lorna, because you're not the only one in this situation. I think the nature of many of these grants is that they're cooperative research. And oftentimes your IRB will have, in whatever form that they're going to give you, whether it's done, through Cayuse or some other My Mentor IRB, they will ask you who else is involved in this research, is anybody else? And that kind of starts off that process. So like, if it's Institute X, you'll say Institute X and give a contact, and they'll start from there.
And then Jared has raised a question. Oh, Lorna, did we answer your?
Yes, I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. And then Jared has a great question in the chat, which is, my college doesn't have IRB. I'm seeking out IRB by working with a university in my cohort. I'm not confident how that works. I could use guidance. So Jared, is this a case where another IRB is willing to oversee research that's happening at your institution?
That's what I'm trying to establish right now. So I just reached out to, a person that I know there, and that they are particularly excited about it. So they're on board, but I just don't know what I do next. Like, cause if I'm the PI, do I need to make them the PI? And then even so, like, how does their IRB approval affect other colleges? I'm just confused.
Yeah, this is a tricky one that I'm usually not as familiar with, but I think you're doing the first thing, which is to see if one of the institutions involved will submit an IRB or will be kind of leading it, and see what it takes. I think it's just you and that partner you were talking with going to that institution's IRB and having a discussion and saying, this is the situation, how can we do it? There are situations out there, which I have never used one, so I do not know, but there are, Sean, what are they called? There are independent IRBs out there. They usually are a cost. And I don't know if your institution has one in mind that they use for situations like this. It could be that they do. And maybe your institutional research office would know, or your data security people might know.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and sorry about that. Jared, one thing too, I'll drop in the chat. Before I was with, or before joining WestEd, I was with the U.S. Department of Education. I was with the Student Privacy Policy Office, the group that administers FERPA, but I also work with NCS's, the SLDS State Support Team. And there was an IRB requirement, and we did like a whole process write-up, and it kind of walks through like, what does the process of getting an IRB approval look like? When you're working with an organization that has to go like outside to get that IRB approval. So there's some good resources in there, and it also goes through and it includes a high level sort of cover some of the things that were in today's webinar. So it'll be kind of like a good information resource, and everyone else for that matter too. And that was created by the IES.
Jared, does that help? Great.
Yes. I think that when I look through that PDF, I'm hoping that might help too.
Super. And we have one more question here. And then after this one, I think we can take a look at a scenario we have, which will pick our brains a little bit more. But here's a great one, Sean. I would love your help on this one because it's for any comments. We plan on not collecting any PII. The only index to a student is an anonymized link to the Canvas data. All PII is in Canvas, which is protected by the institution. Any comments?
That dang definition of PII, the direct and indirect identifiers. And that's one of those things too, right? So within FERPA, we have this concept of de-identified data, and de-identified data means all direct identifiers, name, date of birth, like all those things, plus indirect identifiers have been sufficiently removed from the data so that a reasonable member of the school community can't identify, an individual within the data set, right? So it's just like, it's a super old, requirement and everything. But that's one of those pieces too, where FERPA says de-identified data can have a research identifier applied to it and still be de-identified. When I worked with the state of Wisconsin as a chief privacy officer, I felt like that was okay by FERPA standards, but in Wisconsin, we had a stricter state level student privacy law where we actually mandated that anyone who we gave that level of data to have a written agreement in place. We didn't require them go through IRB review because we didn't consider a research identifier as PII. It didn't actually originate from a student's education record, but like it in the context of that data set, it is identifiable. And it also kind of depends on like what other data you're potentially capturing. And whether it's in the survey or within metadata. So generally, like, no, that's not PII. But like, be ready for people to make the argument that it is, and for the like data contributors to say, well, we do consider it to be PII, so you do need to protect it. Because I've seen, I think a lot of people err on the side of caution in that sort of case as well.
So can I ask a clarifying question? I'm sorry, I'll try and get off. I'll try to get on video. So my question is, I have experience in the financial area where you essentially don't store the information about the person. You just have a pointer, and then Experian or somebody else has the data. And that's what I'm trying to replicate out here, which is that in Canvas, all the information about the student is there, and if somebody wants to get it, they can. But all that we intend to store in the study is information about the student performance on various kinds of tests, but no link to who they are. So that should not be PII and should not follow the FERPA. And I just wanted to get your view on that.
No, and you're right. And that's where the IRB would want to say, so prove to us that this is actually de-identified and document the process that you will be using to de-identify it and to make sure that it is. So, I mean, like, that's what the IRB is doing, is it's that oversight mechanism.
Okay. So document the algorithm for randomizing the identifier. I get it. Okay.
Yep.
And then like what information, they'll want to know what kind of measures or metrics that you have for students. So
yeah, we have written out the IRB. So yes, that we have that. I just wanted to get your view on the PII and FERPA because that is a really difficult discussion. Thanks.
The good thing, the great thing about it is, you mentioned discussion, it is a discussion as in it is a process. So you might have some back and forth with the IRB because they really just want to clarify things and help you and understand, make sure the protections are in place. So it could be just as simple as, okay, great, we see the process, we see the approach, we see the data security plan, we see this and that, it's all good to go. And if there's a question, they'll come in and ask only for clarification usually. Perfect. All right.
Well, please continue to leave questions in the chat. Well, we're going to move on to the next part of the presentation now, which is a case study.
Wonderful. Thank you, Beth. So we do have a case study. We have kind of strummed this up from what we know of research, learning lab grants in general, things that we see. And take a moment to read it along with me. I'm going to read it out loud, and then we're going to kind of dissect it for what the study design, data security, and IRB considerations might be in this example. So we're calling this research Assessing the Quality and Efficacy of an Online Algebra Program Routinely Used in freshman courses. So a team of mathematics faculty across the university and 2 community colleges is looking to assess the quality and efficacy of an online algebra program routinely used at their institutions for freshman Algebra 1 and Algebra 2 courses. The team plans to employ both qualitative and quantitative data collection methods to learn students' perspectives about the program's quality, for example, interest, rigor, relevancy, and to explore efficacy by examining student outcome data. Data collection methods will include surveys and focus groups with students in the courses, some of them who are duly enrolled high school students, and review and analysis of students' grades and course progression. Data collection will also include students who have used the program in classes as well as those who have not used the program. The team is considering whether they might draw on students from their own courses. The team intends to share learning because they expect that the findings they uncover would be generalizable and beneficial outside their own institutions. So here's the scenario. Sit with it for a minute and then come off mute. What jumps out at you? What might be some of the considerations to keep in mind here? Do we have any volunteers?
Yeah.
Great.
So I think that one thing that jumps out is that people using the using frequency or the usage data from these people using this algebra program itself can be can have the information can actually be personally identifiable since different people have different usage of this data because of their different needs.
Great. So already you're asking the question, what is going to be identifiable? What isn't identifiable? And how do we go about determining that with use? And even looking at usage, you're going to have identities involved with that. So great. There's a consideration for identities. We've got Lorna. Lorna, you got a good one. Lorna says, high school students tend to be minors. This research does involve human subjects, college and high school. So, yes, there are high schoolers in here, but what's interesting here is that under FERPA, so yes, I would say this goes through a IRB review, but just keep in mind under FERPA, an eligible student is a student who has reached 18 years of age, right? So you mentioned the minor, or is attending a post-secondary institution. So in that situation, no additional guidance or procedures are needed specifically for the duly enrolled students or 17-year-old freshmen when you're taking into consideration things such as consent. So this would be a consenting student once you get the consent. So that's a FERPA sort of thing to consider. You've got a student who's in college. Sean, is there anything to add for that one? That one stumps people a lot.
Sorry, I was responding in the chat. You were talking about eligible students and sort of coming to the post-secondary institutions. I used the example of Doogie Howser, right? Yes. Remember, he was 12, but he was had his MD and everything. He was 12, but he didn't his parents didn't have any right under FERPA to go to his medical schools or any of those colleges or universities that he got all of his degrees from. To get his grades, because FERPA says that once you are actually attending a post-secondary institution, those rights of access and consent and all those other things under FERPA, those transition to you as the student. Now, there's a gray area, and it's not really a gray area. It's more of tread carefully area, and that's with dual enrollment. Right, so you have high school students who are also going to the local community college, and you might want to find out, well, so do I have to go to the community college to get their grades, or do I go to high school, or how does that work? And generally, there's an agreement between a high school and the community college, like a reciprocity agreement. The students will go to the community college, get that college credit, but the colleges will then report those grades back to the school so that it's part of the high school record. So in that case, parents would actually have access to the high school record and be able to see the grades that the student got at the college because the college reported it. The parents would not be able to go to the community college and actually get those grades. So it's one of those like weird nuances. But realistically, it really comes into play when you're talking about consent. So if you want to actually get a lot of information from an individual and you're asking them to consent to participating in the study or whatever it is, that's when, are you 18? Are you at a university? Go ahead and sign up. Or do I actually have to get the consent from the parent because, it's a minor student?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so minors can't consent. They can provide assent. But when a student is dually enrolled, we are treating them under FERPA as a college student, as someone who's over 18, as an adult. So you don't have to worry about getting parental consent and doing information forms and things like that, sending something home in the mail for the parent to review when you're working with a college student, even if they are a minor. It would be different if you were engaging in research with that same student at their K-12 institution.
Yes, excellent, excellent. And there was also one other comment that Laura had previously made there, that this is human subject research. And I want to say, yes, it is. So when you're taking a look at that sort of buzz phrase that I put in here, that this is something that's done at the institution, right? Well, standard educational practice focuses on internal quality assurance and processes. This would, and that would not be considered regulated research. This case is different because it does involve human subject research that assesses the quality or efficacy of a standard educational practice through an intervention or through interventions with subjects, or as we heard earlier from Jin here, with personally identifiable information that would be subject to an IRB review and approval. So we've got those things. Plus, there's an intent for generalizability. You're going to take this elsewhere, outside of the classroom, hope to see the benefits and gains. Not necessarily just that you're going to present it. You don't always need IRB for presentations, but that you have an intent here to make this as part of contributing to the generalizable knowledge. Any other things? There's quite a few packed in here. There's one very important one if we're thinking about minimizing harm. Minimizing and then consent. We have a few minutes. What do you all feel about this last part with the team is considering whether they might draw on students from their own courses? Ah, great, Beth. What do you think? Excellent.
Yeah, in that case, I think you need to have a colleague or somebody else make the request of the student population in the class so that it doesn't feel like there's any undue pressure or issue within the class for their success in the class if they choose not to participate.
Right. You really don't want to have any coercion, effects of authority. Again, best case scenario, best practice is go to your IRB and have them explain to you, what you can do within their regulations. And like you said, you may need to find an outside agent to recruit. Best practice is not to do it with your own students.
I know that we are coming up on time, but Lisa and I are sharing our contact information at the end. So I hope this is a start of a conversation. We can continue to provide support for you all as you're thinking through some of these issues. But I'll move us through to kind of our next steps and the resources that we want to share. So kind of the punchline that we want you to take away from this is that please plan for data security and IRB activities in your project timeline, whether you're working with one institution or multiple institutions. People have different ways of interpreting the guidance in FERPA, in IRB reviews. So you just want to make sure to start this process early, and it can be really helpful just to share, not necessarily submitting a protocol, but just reaching out to whoever the IRB contact is at your institution or in institutions that you're partnering with and letting them know who's going to be involved in the work, who's going to have access to data, what types of students you're collecting information from. Just give them a general sense of the project and have them weigh in. Definitely. this is a start of a conversation. So I would say to look to people at your institutions as resources. And then finally, we just want to share 2 pages here of links to, about evaluation, about FERPA, the links that Sean shared about data privacy and security and different data definitions. And we just really hope that this can be helpful for you if you're putting an IRB together.
Absolutely. And as Beth said, feel free to contact us. We're around to answer any questions. You have our emails, and we're always happy to see if we can help you think about things in any way.